And this is the Convict Australia podcast. Thank you for tuning in. Joseph Samuels was only 14 years old when he was sentenced to transportation for a robbery he committed in 1795. This wasn't his first offence. He had seen the inside of the Old Bailey courtroom before, when he was about 12 years old. On that occasion, he had been arrested for grand larceny. He'd been found guilty, but was let off with just a warning due to his young age. He wasn't so lucky the next time. The court sentenced him to 7 years. He spent most of his sentence in England, serving out his time in one of their filthy, overcrowded prisons before boarding a ship to New South Wales. However, transportation did nothing to kill Samuel's love of a five-finger discount. Within 2 years of being in the colony, Samuels was planning his next theft. At the time, he was hanging around a gang of thieves and some very shady police officers. At around 5 p.m. on the evening of the 25th of August, 1803, Mary Breeze locked up her house on Back Row in Sydney, which is where Phillip Street stands today. As she left her home and wandered down the cobblestone street that backed onto bush and scrub, little did she realise that the gang of thieves Samuels belonged to were watching her closely. As soon as she was out of view, they descended on her property, gathering in her back garden before breaking into her house. Heading straight to her bedroom, they seized her small, portable desk and fled on foot. When Mary returned at around 8 p.m, she was alarmed to find her back door wide open and bravely entered the house to discover her desk missing. The desk had all her important papers, plus $50, 3 guineas, 2 pieces of gold coin, trinkets, and some copper coins. She raced across the road to alert Officer Joseph Luca, who was the night watchman. Officer Luca was about mid to late 30s, and he was a former convict himself. Luca's shift didn't start until midnight, but he promised he would look into it then. Luca strongly suspected his fellow watchman Simmons to somehow be involved. At midnight, when he went on duty, he searched nearby scrubland in search of the desk. Before the sun had risen the next day, Luca's dead body was discovered on the side of the road leading to Farm Cove, where the botanical gardens stand today. His injuries were extensive and were published in full detail in the Sydney Gazette, with no thought for his loved ones. They described his body as being, quote, shockingly mangled and with the guard of his cutlass buried in his brain, end quote. The sheath was found next to his body. He suffered 16 stab wounds and contusions, with his left ear nearly sliced in half. He was attacked with so many different weapons that the police concluded that there must have been at least 3 men involved in the brutal murder. He'd been beaten with the stolen desk, the frame of a wheelbarrow, and stabbed with Luca's own cutlass. Several men were suspected of the murder. Constable Isaac Simmons and Constable William Bladders were both arrested for Luca's murder, but despite both of them being found covered in blood, there was not enough evidence to convict either one of them. Simmons claimed the blood on him was from a nosebleed, and Bladders claimed that the blood on him was from slaughtering a pig. Another constable, named John Russell, was also questioned and arrested for breaking and entering, but again, there was not enough evidence to convict him. All 3 constables were former convicts. Police also questioned a notorious thief, Richard Jackson, who gave a full confession to breaking and entering into Mary Breeze's house. He said the plan to rob her had been the idea of Samuel's. He told the court that when they approached the house, they happened upon Constable Russell and told him of their plot to steal from her property. He claimed that he asked Russell to keep watch out the front as he and Samuels went in round the back. However, after robbing the house, they didn't see Russell again, and they told the court for that reason they had no plans to share their loot with him. As for Samuels, his fate was sealed when a witness came forward claiming to have seen him in Mary Breeze's backyard at around 6 p.m. along with another man. So he confessed to robbing Mary, but swore that he had nothing to do with Luca's murder. The court found him guilty of the theft, but not of the murder, and sentenced him to death. All the other suspects, including Richard Jackson, avoided conviction. On Monday the 26th of September, 1803, at 9:30 in the morning, the New South Wales Corps loaded Samuels into their horse and cart to take him to the place where he was to be executed. Travelling with him was another man who had been sentenced to death, James Hardwick. They reached their destination to find a crowd had gathered to witness the men being executed. Back then, hangings were often regarded as a source of entertainment for people. Constable Simmons had also been forced to attend to watch his friend be hanged. Want to hear more great stories about convicts? Then grab a copy of Convict Sydney, the real-life stories of 32 prisoners, from Elizabeth Sullivan, who was known about town as the Fighting Hen of Cook's River, with her flamboyant dress and tough countenance, to Robert Sidaway, who entertained local residents by hosting dramatic performances in his theatre. These colourful characters and their individual experiences offer a broader insight into the daily happenings of Sydney and the convict system. To get your copy, just click on the link in the show notes. Both men were given time for religious instruction. Reverend Samuel Marsden had come to commence his ministrations with Hardwick, but Samuels was Jewish and therefore had his own religious council. Then Samuels was questioned again about the murder of Luca and asked if he wanted to unburden himself by making a confession before he met with God. Samuels swore that he did not kill Luca, but told the officer that whilst being held in the same prison cell as Simmons, Simmons had confessed to him. Simmons told him that Luca had discovered him with the desk, so he, quote, knocked him down and given him a topper for luck, end quote. Suspicion had followed Simmons since the crime had taken place, and suddenly everyone at the execution turned to look at him. There were growing discussions amongst the crowd that Samuels was a man who was about to face God, and therefore would not be lying. Any doubt they formerly had in Simmons' involvement with the murder was now gone, but there was still no proof and no way to convict him. At 10 a.m, the ropes were prepared and Samuels and Hardwick were helped back up into the cart. As the noose was secured around their necks and the officer was about to signal for the driver of the cart to pull away, a messenger arrived with a reprieve for Hardwick. He was immediately taken down. Samuel spent the ensuing minutes praying, probably for a reprieve to come for him, but when none came, the signal was given, and the cart drove out from under him. As soon as he felt his weight pull at his neck, the rope snapped and he fell to the ground with a thud. He remained there, motionless, with his face in the dirt, trying to overcome his shock. 2 men hoisted him up and the cart was backed up again. They helped him up onto the cart and again placed a noose around his neck. The signal was given once more, and the cart pulled away, and Samuel's body was thrust downwards, and as his full weight pulled on the noose, the rope began to slip until Samuel's feet were grazing the ground. The crowd was stunned, and some began proclaiming that it was the work of God. The executioner quickly fashioned a new noose. Samuel was now unconscious and was raised up to the noose with the help of some men who put him on their shoulders. They gently lowered his body so the noose could do its work, but again the rope snapped and he fell once more to the ground. By now the crowd was in an uproar. No one could believe what they had just witnessed. Spectators cried out that the invisible hand of God had intervened, and they began calling out for Samuel's release. The provost marshal took off on his horse in search of the governor, and he soon returned with a reprieve. The crowd rejoiced at the news, and Samuel slowly regained consciousness. He appeared confused and had no recollection of what he'd just been through. Officers then began testing the ropes which had failed during the execution and found all to be sound. This was further proof to the crowd of spectators that they had just witnessed the hand of God. Heightened emotions, compassion, and elation spread amongst all that had attended. Samuels was eventually led away, and although he did receive a reprieve of his death sentence, he was punished for the robbery. First, he served time at Risdon Cove in Van Diemen's Land, and was then transferred to Newcastle to work in the coal mines. The murder of Constable Joseph Luca has never been solved and remains Australia's oldest cold case. He is the first Australian police officer to be killed on duty. He was buried at the old Sydney Burial Ground where Town Hall stands today. However, his remains were relocated to Rookwood Cemetery, though there are no records of exactly where he is buried and no headstone. Thank you for listening to the Convict Australia podcast. If you'd like to show your appreciation and get more involved, there are a number of ways you can. The first is by signing up to Convict Australia on Patreon, and you will get some perks like the Convict Australia newsletter. Secondly, leave a review and tell your friends and family. This really does make a huge difference. And lastly, join the Facebook and Instagram group Convict Australia. All the links I've mentioned will be in the show notes. Thank you again. Till next time.